Hello, and welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Today, we return to my all-time personal favorite philosopher, that's Henry David Thoreau. And we're going to be talking about his essay, Walking. Walking is considered one of Thoreau's most popular works, right underneath Civil Disobedience and Walden. It's a pretty short essay, and it's about 30 pages long, and it's talking about walking as an exercise, not a physical exercise, a mental exercise, a spiritual exercise even. Walking in nature as an exercise to develop the soul and the mind. But I gotta be honest with you, for me walking, it was okay, as a philosophical text, it was okay. A lot of it I wasn't really vibing with. I certainly agree with the message, for sure, but Thoreau sometimes does what's kind of a pet peeve of mine, to be honest with you, and that's making a statement without providing not so much evidence, but like having some sort of supportive argument, or like giving me some convincing points that I can kind of work with. A lot of philosophers do that. They'll say, well, this is the case, and they won't really give much supportive ideas. They'll just talk about, well, this is the case and that's what it is, and then they'll use very eloquent language to try and defend it, but the substance, I feel, is sometimes not there. That's a little pet peeve of mine, and Thoreau does that a little bit in Walking. An example of this is in the text he's talking about walking as a mental exercise, more so than a physical exercise, and more a spiritual exercise, walking in nature. He starts saying, well, walking isn't about like exercising. And then he starts kind of ragging off people who kind of lift weights. He's like, people who lift weights, that's just a meaningless exercise, and you can't really get much into that. And lifting weights could be very fulfilling. I don't lift weights personally, and I'm not like a hardcore exercise person, but I do have many friends who do lift weights. That's like a hobby of theirs, or they just do general exercises, and that's kind of like a big thing for them, and that could be a very spiritually fulfilling thing. Thoreau also uses a lot of old school languages, more so just a lot of old school references that are hard to follow. I mean, it might have been nice to have an index to explain some of the old school references, but I'm not saying that I didn't like Walking. I did like it. It just didn't blow me away like Civil Disobedience did or Walden did. I mean, those texts just changed my life dramatically. Not so much Walking. Although Walking does have some very good points, some very meaningful ideas that we could take away and apply to our lives. It really does. Actually, walking is actually a hobby of mine, personally. I enjoy walking, and I do, is less so much the exercise part. Walking in nature, where I live, there's a bunch of parks. We call them regional parks. They're parks where there's a lot of nature, and there's not so much streets and sidewalks. There's a lot of dirt roads, and there's ponds, and there's wetlands and things like that. Granted, it's very close to the streets and the city buildings and such, but they designate those areas and they call them regional parks. And I walk, and sometimes I even jog through a lot of these regional parks. It's a very good hobby of mine. I do find them very meditative and relaxing. I've shot a few videos I've shot in some of those parks. So I get what Thoreau's talking about. Let me read you this quote. "We have heard of a society for the diffusion of useful knowledge. It is said that knowledge is power, and the like. Methinks there is equal need of a society for the diffusion of useful ignorance, what we call beautiful knowledge, a knowledge useful in a higher sense. For what is most of our boasted so-called knowledge but a conceit that we know something which robs us of the advantage of our actual ignorance? What we call knowledge is often our positive ignorance. Ignorance, our negative knowledge. By long years of patient industry and reading of the newspapers, for what are the libraries of science but files of newspapers? A man accumulates a myriad facts, lays them up in his memory, and then when in some spring of his life he saunters abroad into the great fields of thought, he as it were goes to grass like a horse and leaves all his harness behind in a stable. I would say to the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, sometimes go to the grass. You have eaten hay long enough. The spring has come with its green crop. The very cows are driven to their country pasture before the end of May. Though I have heard of one unnatural farmer who kept his cow in the barn and fed her on hay all the year round. So frequently, the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge treats its cattle. I feel that's a very powerful quote. What's being said there? This is what I think. There's a saying that Thoreau threw out there, it's still popular today. Knowledge is power, right? And knowledge is powerful. But there's a difference between knowledge and just accumulating facts and various understandings. When your only concern, your only focus is just to understand a lot of facts and figures or just be able to know a lot of things, if knowledge is your only concern, then in many ways that could be detrimental. Because what can happen, the danger that could happen is that you can accumulate all this knowledge and then think you're something you're not. You think like, oh, I'm really smart now. I know a lot about a lot of things. And there's not many things out there that I know nothing about. I'm an expert in a lot of stuff. And when you develop that attitude, then you become closed-minded. You become closed off to other possibilities because you think you have all this knowledge. You're no longer open to learn, right? Because you think you don't need to learn anymore. That happens a lot. People think they are experts in things because they accumulate all this knowledge, and then when they need to learn something, they don't want to learn it because like, oh, I already know about that. I don't even need to hear it. In a way, it's good to acknowledge your ignorance. If you acknowledge that you're always ignorant in some matters, because that's always the case. No matter how much you learn, there's always something that's useful that you can learn and use that knowledge to develop yourself even further. You can always develop yourself even further and become a better person, no matter how much knowledge you have, right? Here's another powerful quote. A man's ignorance sometimes is not only useful, but beautiful, while his knowledge, so-called, is oftentimes worse than useless, besides being ugly. Which is the best man to deal with? He who knows nothing about a subject, and what is extremely rare, knows that he knows nothing, or he who really knows something about it, but thinks that he knows all? My desire for knowledge is intermittent, but my desire to bathe my head in atmospheres unknown to my feet is perennial and constant. The highest that we can attain to is not knowledge, but sympathy with intelligence. I do not know that this higher knowledge amounts to anything more definite than a novel and grand surprise on a sudden revelation of the insufficiency of all that we called knowledge before. A discovery that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in our philosophy. It is the lighting up of the mists by the sun. Man cannot know in any higher sense than this, any more than he can look serenely and with impunity in the face of the sun. You will not perceive that as perceiving a particular thing, say the Chaldean oracles. So again, Thoreau's talking about how ignorance can be a good thing because you leave yourself open. Now you might think he's going off on a tangent, right? What does this have to do with walking in nature? But he's trying to say, like, when you walk in nature, when you're just walking in your environment and you really absorb yourself in the nature around you, that helps you become aware of your ignorance. You see the world, you see the relationship you have with nature. You discover that there's many things that you really don't know. With all your knowledge and intellect, you look around you and you see all these things, trees, animals, plant life, the weather. You see all this stuff around you, things that you really don't know much about. Not only does it ground you and humbles you, it gives you a perspective that you're a part of something that is grand, that is open to discovery. There's still so much left to be known. Then you're in a position to receive, right? Rather than push back. Like, okay, there's all these things around me that I don't really know much about, and I'm only one aspect, one part of this whole thing, this atmosphere, the nature. I'm only one part of that. How do I relate to that? What can I learn from all this stuff around me, all this stuff that I'm a part of, all this stuff that I don't know? You're ready to learn. You're ready to develop. We tend to lose that when we surround ourselves in urban environments, skyscrapers, streets, cars, TVs, cell phones, laptops, computers. even in our own houses. We were surrounded by all these things that gives us this false impression that man knows everything or almost everything, right? All these things around us. We think, like, wow, we've conquered the world with our knowledge. Leave all that for a second. Just go out in nature. Go to a regional park, go to a national park where there's open roads and nature all around with you. You'll lose that perspective immediately. That's why when people go to like Yosemite National Park or the Grand Canyon, any other of these national parks, it changes them. It really does. It changes their whole perspective because they begin to realize, like, wow, I really don't know that much. There's so much about this earth and my relationship to the earth that I don't know about. And it leaves you open. It almost breaks you down, but it breaks you down in a spiritually beneficial way. It's true. Man has achieved great things with our technology, our civil engineering, all the structures that we surround ourselves with, highways, streets, all the mechanisms that we use, cars, trains, automobiles, the internet, HD cameras, right? We think we know so much, but there's just so much we don't know. And the exercise of walking in nature reminds us of that. It reminds us to keep an open mind, right? Open ourselves up to knowledge. We don't know everything. When you encounter different perspectives, different opinions, different ideologies, remember, you don't know everything. Most things that are knowable, you don't know. 99.9% of the things that are knowable in the world, you don't know. Even if you have like a PhD in quantum mechanics or something like that. There's just so many things you don't know. So leave yourself open. Allow yourself to develop and learn even more. Don't close yourself off to other forms of knowledge. There's so much more you can develop mentally and spiritually. That's what's going down in Walking by Henry David Thoreau. Check it out. I enjoyed it. It wasn't a mind-blowing essay for me personally, but there are some very powerful things in it. This right here actually is not, this whole book is not the essay. It's a collection of all of Thoreau's popular works. And Walking is one of the texts that it has in there. Again, I had to get the collection right because Thoreau's my favorite philosopher. Anyway, this is The Black Ponderer. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought. Check this out. Check this out. You see this? You see this right here? It's like a mistake in the printing, right? An error. Look at this. It's crazy. I thought at first I was missing pages. Like, uh-oh, I might have to return this, but no. You see that? Right. And then it's the same pages. It's just they added extra half pages. It's like a little bonus half. What's going on here? I don't understand.